Sometimes life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. It humbles the arrogant and strengthens the broken. Rosalyn never imagined that the same man who once made her feel like the luckiest woman alive would one day invite her to his wedding, not out of love, but to disgrace her in front of everyone. And she certainly never imagined she'd walk into that wedding draped in elegance, stepping out of a limousine with 3 little miracles who carried her eyes and her smile, the triplets who became her redemption. Before I proceed, I want you to do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop your country in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening to me from. Thank you. But before that triumphant moment came, there was pain. Deep, soul-splitting pain that would reshape who she was. At 23, Rosalyn believed in love like a religion. Jerome, tall, smooth-skinned, with a charming smile that could melt anyone's defenses, swept her off her feet in a whirlwind of promises. He said she was the one. He told her they'd build an empire together, a love that could withstand anything. And she believed him. Because when you're young and in love, faith feels easier than doubt. The first warning came wrapped in excuses. Jerome had a son from a previous relationship, a little boy named Fred. That in itself wasn't a problem. What unsettled Rosalyn was how Jerome spoke about the child's mother, Veronica. She was just a mistake, he'd say with a laugh, brushing off the fact that he still texted her, still saw her for Fred's sake. Each time Rosalyn felt uneasy, he'd look her in the eyes and say, "You're my future, baby. Don't go looking for ghosts in our house." She swallowed her doubts, believing that love meant trust, even when trust felt like closing her eyes while standing at the edge of a cliff. Months passed, then years, and the fairy tale began to crack. They wanted children, but month after month the test results came back negative. Rosalyn blamed herself, even before Jerome did. She prayed, she cried, she visited doctors alone. Every test came back clear. She was perfectly healthy. But Jerome refused to hear it. "My boy's proof I can make babies," he said coldly. "So what's wrong with you?" Those words echoed through their house like a curse. What's wrong with you? When dinner wasn't right, when she asked too many questions, when she dared to want more, it always came back to that. And when Jerome's frustration grew, so did his cruelty. He never hit her outright, but his hands were not kind. A tight grip on her wrist, fingers pressed too hard into her shoulders, the kind of touch that left invisible bruises that took longer to heal than any wound. His words, though, were sharper than any slap. "You lucky I even married you. Most men wouldn't want a woman who can't give them children." Still, she stayed, because sometimes love makes fools of us all. 6 years passed like that, a slow death of hope. Jerome's business at the auto shop began to falter, and money became yet another weapon in his arsenal of control. Rosalyn had been saving secretly, a modest $12,000 scraped together from years of skipped lunches and coupon clipping. She dreamed of using it for fertility treatments or maybe a small home, but when Jerome found out, his eyes gleamed in a way that frightened her. "You've been sitting on 12 grand while I'm stressing over bills?" he demanded. "It's for us," she said softly. "Our future is right now," he replied, spinning dreams of investment and opportunity. He spoke of his friend's dry cleaning business and how, with a little help, he could turn their life around. He painted pictures so vivid, so hopeful, that Rosalyn silenced the voice in her head screaming no. That night, she handed over everything, every dollar she'd saved. And for the first time in years, he held her like he used to, whispering promises of better days, of love reborn. She recorded that moment on her phone, a quiet act of self-preservation she didn't understand at the time. For a while, it seemed he'd been right. The business thrived. Jerome was suddenly confident, successful, admired. But instead of gratitude, success bred arrogance. He started dressing better, smelling of new colognes she hadn't bought, spending nights at work. The texts to Veronica turned into calls, the calls into overnight visits to see Fred. Rosalyn, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines, her heart splintering a little more each day. The day it all unraveled, she came home early from work. ready to surprise him with dinner and good news. She'd saved enough for a small weekend trip, a chance to reconnect. But the moment she reached the front porch, she froze. Inside, Jerome's laughter mingled with Veronica's voice. "She's so pathetic," Veronica sneered, "still playing wife like y'all actually have a real marriage." Jerome laughed, that laugh she once loved. "I can't keep doing this much longer. I don't need her anymore. I'm making real money now." "Then divorce her," Veronica urged. "It ain't that simple. She might come for the business." "Technically, she did help me get started." "How much could she possibly have helped?" Jerome chuckled. "She gave me $12,000, her whole savings. That woman's so desperate for me to love her. She'd give me her kidneys if I asked nice enough." Their laughter stabbed her heart like knives. Rosalyn stood outside listening, trembling, every word shattering the illusion she'd clung to. She sat in her car for hours before finally walking inside. Jerome didn't even flinch when he saw her. "Hey, baby. What's for dinner?" She cooked in silence that night, tears dripping into the food she used to make with love. He ate like nothing had happened. 3 days later, he handed her divorce papers. "I don't love you anymore," he said casually, as if talking about the weather. "We don't have kids. We barely talk. It's over." "What about the money I gave you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was a gift," he said flatly, his hand already on the doorknob. And just like that, 6 years of marriage ended with a shrug. Within weeks, Veronica and her son moved into the home Rosalyn had built. She left with nothing but a car full of clothes and a heart full of scars. At 29, she was back to square one. No husband, no house, no money, no children. Just a wounded spirit and a mother waiting for her in Chicago. Her mother was ill. Diabetes, high blood pressure, exhaustion from years of overwork. The small restaurant she once owned stood closed, dust-covered but still full of memories. Rosalyn apologized for coming home broken, but her mother took her hand and said, "Don't you dare feel sorry for loving someone. That's not weakness, that's strength." Still, Rosalyn felt empty. Nights passed without sleep. Days blurred together. Until one morning she met Robert. He wasn't flashy like Jerome. He didn't have slick words or expensive suits. What he had was gentleness, the kind that doesn't demand or judge. A photographer documenting local renewal projects, he saw beauty in broken things, even in her mother's abandoned restaurant. "I can see the love that built this place," he said softly. Rosalyn avoided him at first, hiding behind closed doors. But he stayed. He sat beside her in silence on the porch, offering companionship instead of pity. It was the first time in months she felt like breathing didn't hurt. After 3 months, she told him everything. About Jerome, the money, the humiliation. She expected judgment. Instead, Robert's eyes burned with anger. Not at her, but for her. "That man's a fool," he said. "And one day he'll realize what he gave up." For the first time in years, she believed someone meant those words. And for the first time in years, she began to rebuild. Rosalyn's healing didn't happen overnight. Pain like hers didn't simply disappear. It had to be peeled away layer by layer, like old wallpaper hiding the scars on a wall. But with Robert's quiet presence and her mother's steady encouragement, she began to breathe again. She started small, helping her mother clean up the old restaurant. The place had been closed for 2 years, but beneath the dust, Rosalyn could still smell the echoes of her childhood. Cornbread baking, laughter from customers, the music her mother used to hum while she worked. Robert showed up almost every day, camera slung around his neck, capturing the restoration process like it was a sacred act. "Every brick has a story," he'd say, snapping pictures of Rosalyn's hands as she scrubbed the counters. "And yours deserves to be told." At first, Rosalyn laughed it off, but soon she began to see what he saw. Not a broken woman, but a survivor piecing her life back together. Together, she and Robert began planning to reopen the restaurant, not just as a business, but as a place that fed both body and soul. Her mother's recipes, Robert's photographs decorating the walls, and Rosalyn's determination. It all came together slowly, tenderly. When the restaurant finally reopened, The neighborhood showed up in full force. People hugged Rosalyn's mother, congratulated her, and marveled at how the place looked better than ever. And amid the laughter and clinking dishes, Robert pulled Rosalyn aside and whispered, "You did this. I couldn't have without you," she said, her voice trembling. He smiled. "You just needed someone to remind you of your strength." Weeks turned into months, and the restaurant flourished. The local paper even did a feature story on how a mother and daughter revived a forgotten landmark. Business grew, and so did Rosalyn's sense of peace. For the first time in years, she felt whole again. And then, life, in its strange poetic timing, handed her the one thing she thought she could never have: motherhood. She hadn't planned it, hadn't even imagined it was possible after all those years of being told she was barren. But when she missed her period and took a test on a whim, 2 pink lines appeared, clear as day. At first, she thought it was a mistake. She sat on the bathroom floor for nearly an hour, staring at that tiny piece of plastic like it had performed a miracle. Robert was speechless when she told him. He pulled her into his arms and whispered, "You were never broken, Rosalyn. You were just waiting for the right love." Pregnancy wasn't easy, but she cherished every moment, every flutter, every kick, every heartbeat. Her mother cried tears of joy the first time she felt the babies move beneath Rosalyn's hand. Yes, babies. At 12 weeks, the doctor smiled at the screen and said, "Congratulations, Miss Adams, you're having triplets." Rosalyn laughed through her tears, overwhelmed by the divine irony of it all. The woman Jerome had mocked for being barren was now carrying 3 lives within her. It felt like the universe itself was rewriting her story, not out of revenge, but out of justice. Robert stood by her side through it all. Every appointment, every scare, every sleepless night. When the triplets were finally born, 2 girls and a boy, he cried harder than she did. He named them Grace, Hope, and Isaiah, saying they represented everything Rosalyn had given the world and finally received in return. Her mother lived long enough to hold them in her arms, whispering blessings over each one. When she passed peacefully, a few months later, Rosalyn felt grief, but not the kind that crushed, the kind that reminds you love never truly leaves. Years passed, and Rosalyn thrived. Her restaurant, Mama's Table, became one of Chicago's most beloved spots. Her story, the woman who rebuilt her life after heartbreak, inspired others. Robert turned his photo series of her journey into an exhibit called The Light Returns, which was featured in galleries across the country. Then, one morning, a letter arrived in the mail, an invitation embossed in gold. It was from Jerome. He was getting married, to Veronica. The words on the invitation were smug, even elegant, but the intention was clear. Gossip had likely reached him about her success, her restaurant, and the fact that she was raising children. Maybe he thought the stories were exaggerated, or maybe he wanted to prove he was still the one in control. Whatever the reason, he invited her, the woman he once called barren and broke, to his wedding. Robert found her staring at the invitation, silent. "You don't have to go," he said gently. "Oh, I'm going," Rosalyn replied softly. "Not for revenge, for closure." The day of the wedding arrived bright and clear. The venue was lavish, chandeliers glittering, violins playing, the air thick with perfume and pride. Guests whispered as a sleek black limousine pulled up outside. When Rosalyn stepped out, the crowd fell silent. She wore an ivory gown that shimmered under the sunlight, her hair cascading like silk. But it wasn't her beauty that drew their eyes. It was the 3 little children who stepped out after her, dressed in matching outfits, holding her hands. Grace, Hope, and Isaiah. Someone whispered, "Wait, isn't that Jerome's ex-wife? I thought she couldn't have kids." Rosalyn smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from knowing you no longer need to explain yourself. Inside, Jerome froze when he saw her. His confident smirk faltered, replaced by something he couldn't hide. Shock, then shame. Veronica followed his gaze and stiffened, her own smile wavering. Rosalyn walked past them with quiet dignity, greeting guests who couldn't help but stare. When Jerome finally approached her, trying to regain his composure, he said, "Rosalyn, I didn't expect you'd come." "I'm sure you didn't," she replied calmly. He glanced at the children. "Are those yours?" She nodded, eyes steady. "Mine. And they're everything you said I'd never have." For the first time, Jerome couldn't find words. His arrogance cracked, revealing something hollow underneath. The room had gone silent, guests pretending not to listen but hanging on every word. Rosalyn didn't linger. She simply smiled, not with malice but peace, and turned to leave, her triplets following behind her like symbols of grace. Outside, Robert waited by the car, watching her with quiet pride. "How did it feel?" he asked as he opened the door for her. "Like the last page of a long story," she said softly. "And the first page of a new one." As the limousine pulled away, she glanced back once, not at Jerome, but at the woman she used to be. The one who thought love meant sacrifice, who gave everything and asked for nothing. That version of Rosalyn was gone. In her place stood a woman reborn, stronger, wiser, radiant with the light of her own worth. And though Jerome's laughter once broke her, she now laughed freely. Not because life was perfect, but because she had finally learned that her happiness was never his to give or take. In the end, Rosalyn didn't just survive, she triumphed. She walked into her ex-husband's wedding, not as a victim or a warning, but as living proof that some endings are really beginnings wearing disguises. And as her children's laughter filled the car, she whispered to herself the words her mother once said, "Don't you ever be ashamed of loving deeply." That's where your power comes from. Because for Rosalyn, love had come full circle, not through the man who broke her, but through the life she built after him.